Are you ready to become the balanced leader you are destined to become? Then stay right here. Welcome to today's Balanced Leader, where we empower today's leader to be the best that you can be, both in your professional and personal life. I'm your host, Caroline Baird, and I've explored and believe the intersection of wellness and leadership are key to finding the balance you are craving as a leader. This is the show where we focus on leadership and the importance of maintaining balance in today's fast-paced and constantly changing world. We talk about topics related to leadership, from communication and team building to personal development and finding balance during challenging times. We will also hear from inspiring guests who have achieved success in their fields and have valuable insights to share about their leadership journeys and on what it takes to be a successful leader. But this podcast isn't just about leadership, it's also about wellness too. Taking care of your mind, body, and spirit is essential to becoming a successful leader, and you'll get tips and strategies for living a healthy, balanced life, from managing burnout and improving mental health, to finding ways to reset and reground during a typical day at work so that you can achieve your goals. So whether you're a CEO, an entrepreneur, or just someone looking to improve your leadership skills, this podcast is for you. Are you ready? Well, let's get going. Hello, and welcome to today's Balanced Leader, where we'll dive into some captivating stories and enlightening discussions that fuel personal and professional growth with a balance and grace. As you know, I'm your host, Caroline Baird, and today we have the privilege of having a remarkable guest with us, Gary Nowak, and I'm really interested for you to hear about his share. So Gary was a former partner at a Big Four professional services firm, and his career journey is nothing short of inspiring, to be honest. With exposure to diverse company cultures, international experiences around the world, and a profound belief that your career is a marathon, not a sprint, he offers a unique insight on success. Beyond his professional achievements, Gary's diverse interests are from financial and real estate investment to being a whiskey enthusiast and supporter of the arts, which make him a truly multifaceted individual. And I wanted to welcome you to the show, Gary.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you for having me as a guest on your podcast. I truly appreciate it. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, I am too. I've listened to Gary, and we'll talk a little bit later. Gary hosts two of his own podcasts. But I think first and foremost, when I got to know you and I got to read your bio, it was truly inspiring. And I had a lot of questions to ask around leadership. And maybe you can start, and I'll let you take the runway with it, around you've worked with so many cultures and companies, and you've worked in so many different places around the world. How has that formulated who you are today, and what do you see as a leader, what that can benefit somebody from?
So thanks for that. And I think when I reflect back on my career at this point, when I was going through it, I didn't realize what I was doing. And I am an executive coach now. And what strikes me these days is I built my career on wanting to go see the world. It wasn't about being a partner at a Big Four. It wasn't about anything specific. For some reason, I just wanted to go see the world. So culturally, I wanted to be exposed to various places. Some of the places I've lived in China, Singapore, Australia, Scotland, the Netherlands. And to your question, what I've noticed around leadership and cultures, there's absolutely cultural differences between certain places, how to act. And one of the things that was shared to me with one of my bosses while I was at KPMG is he recognized in me as like, Gary, you acclimate very quickly. You're a chameleon. And my career was built around consulting. And I think what I didn't realize at the time that I always like when leaders do this is they point things out to you that you're not seeing. So in my career, I tried to point out to people, hey, you're really good at this. You're really good at that. And that helps hone the skill of that person to recognize that, wow, I guess I am really good at that. I should focus on that more, because too often people are good at something and they just take it for granted.
Right.
So what I did with my career, I acclimated, and I don't go into places and try to impart my personality on them. I sit back and I watch. And I think that's what I enjoyed about my career. I think that's what I enjoy about the way I show up for certain things, that I'm very much adaptable to environments. And I think that's why I had success going global with my career and why I enjoyed it so much, because I felt that was a good aspect of how I show up and a good ability to be successful in China as well as Scotland as well as Singapore, and learning what it takes. Now, I've made heaps of mistakes. And if you want to talk about those, I can give you heaps of detail about how I've messed up in my career for sure. But I feel that's what I like about my career. And I think that's what I wanted to do was acclimate to different places and just experience the different cultures and the way people are doing it. Because I'm even today fascinated by other cultures.
Absolutely. And I think, you were obviously chosen because of your strengths and your personality. And I often tell our listeners that, when we think about strengths, it doesn't mean we want to use those to bulldoze over everybody and make them all adhere to what we're doing. But certainly those are the strengths that you bring in to lead, to develop, because we often talk about, a leader, the strongest leader is a leader who leads, will develop their team, will not take credit when something goes great, will have your back, but will also take accountability when something doesn't go right. So, you talk about some of the mistakes you made. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but, a lot of companies or individuals speak about you learn through your mistakes. And, that's what makes you stronger and that's what makes you learn. And we've had a previous episode where we talked a little bit about that. Would love your take on, making mistakes, because I think sometimes we're too afraid to make the mistake because it will impact about what people think about us personally.
Always a good question about mistakes. And obviously, we don't go out to make mistakes, but the importance and the wisdom is if you learn from your mistakes, the smartest person is the one that's made the most mistakes, because you continue to learn. And I view that as going down to your foundation of why you're doing something, and also being open to what didn't work, what was your original expectation, and what happened, and maybe how you were wrong in that assumption.
Mhm.
But there are certain things you want to look back at mistakes of, you had certain assumptions, or you were weary of something, or you thought something was going to happen. So it pushed you in a different direction. What I'm learning more and more with good leadership is preparation and really listening and taking everybody's opinion in and being
Mhm.
very good at that. And early you mentioned strengths. I think it's important to understand what your strengths are. And I'm a big advocate. Every strength has a weakness and vice versa. So understanding that and being open to interpreting that with a different way to look at something, or taking your mistakes. For instance, one of my biggest mistakes in my career was what got me to where I was, which was I said yes to everything. So on the continuum, what do you want me to do? Just say yes, no questions whatsoever, because of various things, because of my background, my education, grew up lower middle class and went to a community college and a secondary business college. So I felt I didn't have a big university behind me. So what I did have was a good attitude. And throughout my career, I just kept saying yes to certain things, and I never questioned. Well, as you and I know, as you go through your career, you need to say yes, but you also need to question, what are the expectations? What do you need from me? And that lever never clicked over for me. And had I done it in certain circumstances where I would have asked questions, and I'll give you a for instance, but it would have made a world of difference. And the example that I have is I was asked to be a partner down in Australia. Great, love to. And what I recognized was I wanted to go see the world. And we're living in Australia. It's a dream for a lot of Americans. Like, wow, I get to go live in Australia. So I wasn't really concerned about what they wanted me to do there. I just wanted to go there to live. So they asked me, would you come down and lead this group? Yeah, I'll lead it. Didn't ask a question, like, when do you need me there? All that. And they said, well, we think this practice can be as large as the practice in Sydney. And I said, okay, great. Never asked the question. When do you need me? I'm there. Well, had I asked one simple question, and this is the mistake in my career of just saying yes, on one side it's an asset, on the other side it's a weakness, and this is where it was a clear weakness, was, okay, tell me the partner director makeup in Sydney. Well, we have one partner and 5 really strong directors. Awesome, great. What's the partner makeup, director makeup in Melbourne, where they wanted me to go. Well, you're going to be the partner. Okay, how many directors? None.
Oh,
Had I just asked that question and said, well, okay, how do you expect me to build up the revenue to that? How many people are you hiring to fill in that void? Because in that industry, you need people with knowledge on the ground. So my big mistake, it's a career mistake, going from a strength. And if you just picture in your mind a continuum of strength working its way over to a weakness, this kept moving over to a weakness. My yes, I'm going to get in there and do it turned into probably one of the, I wouldn't say it was a mistake. I keep saying it's a mistake, and that's what we're talking about. But I just think there's a realization in every career where what got you there isn't what's going to keep you there. And you need to constantly reflect down into your leadership style or what made you great where you're at. Is that still going to serve you well? And do you need to pivot in certain areas?
I love that. I love that, those questions. Ironically, I've been working with somebody, and I would say we've probably all experienced that in our life, right, Gary, where we're just so excited to take something on or whatever, and not asking those questions. Even just what does success look like? What's the timeline to achieve it, right? Certain things like that. And to your point, that team, can't imagine being the only partner and having directors. It's going to take a little bit of time, to get the ball rolling. But I love that you speak to asking those questions. And I love the yes, right? So with anything in your career, as long as you can do it and you're poised to do it, and it's something you're excited about, absolutely say yes. You can figure out a lot, but you still have to ask those key questions to make sure that it is what you expect it's going to be. So I love that.
The one recognition that I want to throw out there is my perception of a question early. Early, I perceived a question as being confrontational.
Mhm.
What I realized, a question is clarification. And I knew in my mind, if I asked a question about something, I felt like it was confrontational to them. And now what I'm learning, if you picture a big funnel and questions going into the top of the funnel, well, what comes back out after you answer all those questions is clarity. You get clarity on what they want. And I'll give you a quick example. I live in Las Vegas. If you said to me, hey, Gary, tell me about Las Vegas. Well, if I didn't ask you a question, I don't know what aspect of Las Vegas you want to hear about, whether it's gambling, the shows, the sphere, the food, the hiking, the weather, the real estate. So that is a good example of, hey, tell me about Vegas, or what do you like about Vegas? I need more clarity on what you want to hear. And unless I ask you a question, it's not confrontational at all. It's getting more clarity because I want to answer the question that you want to ask. And if you reflect, anybody that's listening reflects on their own life and they get a question thrown at them, they start answering. And the other person says, oh, that's great. But what I really wanted to hear about was this. Meanwhile, you spent 30 seconds, 45 seconds talking about something that wasn't their focus, and they didn't ask a pointed question. So questions are for clarity, not for confrontation. And
I
that's
love
a
that.
big thing that I learned.
Yeah, I love that. And, often talk about assumptions. Don't make assumptions. You may assume that you know what the individual wants, to your point, food. It may be real estate. So I quite enjoy that. My next question for you is around, you describe somebody's career as being a marathon, not a sprint. And I mean, it makes perfect sense. I would just love to know how you're able to maintain that perspective long term. And what advice do you give to individuals looking to build that lasting career?
I would love to have a good question right now, Carol, for good reason.
Oh,
I'm Ruh-roh.
you're going to throw it back at me.
Well, here's the response. With your career is a marathon, not a sprint. And I'm not saying that because I find people in their 20s will change jobs quite a bit. I'm at the tail end of baby boomer. We get a job, we stick with it. And that's just the way our mentality was and I think it was. Well, that's not today. And it's not saying you can sprint through, you can have multiple jobs before the time you're 30. That's fine. Just recognize the journey of your career it's the fun part. It always is. It's not reaching the height and the pinnacle. That's great for a while. But if you're scaling a mountain, and you'll always reflect on how difficult it was and the pain it was. And my point with the life as a marathon is enjoy the journey while you're going through it. Celebrate today and what you did rather than once you reach that job. Don't postpone your confidence in your career, your happiness with your career, your respect for your career until something happens. Enjoy that while you're going through it and reflect, a week, a month, just give yourself some grace, give yourself some appreciation because what you're looking for, that job, that career point, it may not be there. And once you get there, you may realize it's not what you thought it was, or it didn't make you feel the way you thought it was. So I'm a big James Clear Atomic Habits fan. And what he celebrates is you don't rise to the level of your goal, you sink to the level of your habits and your process. And my point with that is enjoy your process when you build it, and enjoy every day that you're building your career, you're getting closer to what you want, and just celebrate what you've built for yourself wherever you're at in your career at any point, and just really appreciate you. And if you need to pivot one way or the other, then do it, but recognize why you're doing it. And don't say, oh, once I get this, I'll be happy. Once I do that, I'll be happy. Just be happy where you're at now and work towards a goal that you think is good for you.
Love that. And always be changing your goals. That's why in, the HR world where I come from, we often talk about your goals are yes, they're set, but they're not forever, right? You're constantly changing your goals or making them more challenging. And I think to your point, if you don't live in the moment and don't enjoy what you've done or where you are, and even if you've made a mistake, it's a learning experience that will just make you stronger moving forward and really help you through your career. I've often coached individuals and have said, think about what you went to. In Canada, we have college and university, what you've taken, what degree or certificate did you get? And is that what you're still doing today? A lot of people haven't. They've brought elements with them, but they haven't stayed. And that's what I always say, I've always enjoyed working with people. I didn't start in HR. I shifted to HR partway through my career, but I've always enjoyed that people perspective, that being able to help and grow individuals. And so it just makes sense that every position that I've held has been something that has that element to it. But I love that living in the moment and recognizing today. It also helps when you are interviewing for other jobs or creating a resume, because a lot of times we forget those things. And so if you can keep track of them, they certainly help you when you have to speak to somebody about an interview around what your achievements have been. You've actually got some concrete evidence of what you've done and are able to celebrate those.
And maybe to solidify this for your listeners is everybody just take a moment to reflect back on something in your career. What do you remember? Oftentimes, especially in the consulting world, because I feel working in consulting is working like in dog years. 1 year of consulting is 3 to 5 years of industry because you get so much. But what I've realized is you remember the people and the connections and the late nights. You don't remember what you were working on, but you do remember when I was working with that team, we just had such a good time, such a good connection. And anybody at any point in their career can do that, to recognize, boy, we were really having a good time there. That was a lot of fun. And the details, the tangible aspects of it, you may not remember, but you'll always remember that. So what does that tell you? Is as you start reflecting back, recognize what stood out for you, and you're experiencing that today. So instead of looking back and celebrating, you could celebrate while you're in the moment when you're on a good team. You know what? It's trying, it's a bit stressful, but you'll say, you know what? These are the times that I'm going to look back on that were great. And I guess my point is, while you're in it, celebrate it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It makes me think a little bit about self-awareness. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about the role of self-awareness and what has that played in your career and in your personal growth. And I think being able to speak to self-awareness, I'm a baby boomer, at the tail end of a baby boomer as well. So how do we help individuals come to understand yourself better over the years, and what self-awareness can do for you?
I wish I would have known this was a question, because I don't have any self-awareness at all. It's a big downside to my personality. Of course, hopefully I'm just kidding, because I do have the self-awareness that I acclimate. But self-awareness, I feel in our world of executive coaching, when we're working with somebody that is very self-aware, that's one of the most important elements. We coach people that, I don't know. they don't know either because they really don't know and they're not self-aware, or they don't want to articulate what they know.
Right.
So I think self-awareness is massive. In fact, self-awareness for me could have been detrimental, but I constantly reflected and thought about how I'm showing up, what went well, what didn't. I'm a massive feedback person. I like getting feedback. I like giving feedback. And if you have blind spots or you're not aware of things, other people can help you out with that. And there's various ways in which you can do that. But getting comfortable with feedback, both giving and receiving, is very big for self-awareness. But I feel since I started coaching, we talked about when I was living my career, I was going through getting jobs and going around various places to live. And when I reflected back, I was like, I just wanted to go see the world.
Mhm.
And I don't care at what point you are in your life or career, once you have a realization about yourself, it just becomes really clear. Like, wow. And a lot of my coaching practice is based around taking the invisible, moving it to visible, and then making it obvious. I think
Mm.
as a good coach, we try to uncover the invisible. As going through coaching, I am learning so much more about myself and why I did things. It's like, that's why I never got married. That's why I did this. That's why I didn't ask questions when I was going to Australia, because I might have asked a question they didn't want to hear, and they might have realized they don't need me down there. And that would have been horrible because I just wanted to go live in Australia. So you realize that stuff about yourself. The point I think that I'd like to make is, if you can understand these things about you while you're going through them, and you have way more runway in front of you than, behind you, that's going to help you make better decisions. And that's why I feel I'm coaching, is to create that self-awareness in people, to create the invisible, to make it visible, and then make it obvious, so they can say, oh, of course that's why I don't make connections with people, because of X, Y, and Z. It's so obvious now. And that's what I try to uncover for people. You can still be self-aware, but you may have things that are happening that are invisible to you. That one of the big analogies I'm using these days, I love jigsaw puzzles. And I'll say, unless you focus on a portion of the jigsaw puzzle, it's very hard to find the pieces. But if you look at a jigsaw puzzle and say, oh, I'm going to focus on this red balloon or this yellow brick road or the green car, then the pieces that fit in there, you'll see them. You'll see 1,000 pieces, but now you're only seeing ones that have a little bit of those shades of color in them, and then it becomes easier to put that together. So once you start focusing on something and breaking it down, i.e., self-awareness or getting coaching to help you understand what that is, I think the better you're going to be, in your private life, personal life, business life, and put yourself on a career path that will be successful for you, so that you can truly take it to a career instead of just a job.
I love that, because as you're talking about that, and by the way, I'm a puzzle person. I felt like he's got a camera in here somewhere. He's watching me do puzzles. That's my downtime when I need to do puzzles. But when we talk about that, and you talk about feedback and that, I think I've come to look at mid-year and year-end performance reviews very differently, and most people dread them. And they're like, oh, got to write up another performance review. But talk about really honing in on your tangible, intangible skills, but also your self awareness, right? Is being able to really get that good feedback. And you talk about things that individuals see that you don't see. So as long as you're open to that feedback, the impact that it could have for you, your trajectory in your career or in your personal life is pretty incredible. Do you give usually any guidance for individuals? Because it's hard sometimes to get feedback. I get it. And you talk a little bit about not asking that question. So there's a little bit of that fear of, well, maybe I won't be able to go to live where I want to live. What would you say would be a good thing for individuals? Now I'm in the seat of receiving feedback that you would give me guidance on as a coach.
So there's two angles to it. One is opening yourself up for receiving it, and I'll talk about that for a little bit. And then the other side of it is getting comfortable delivering it. So the receiving side, very important to open yourself up for feedback, so the other person knows that it's a safe place for them to tell you things. And the more you get comfortable with it, the better. If you've ever been sitting and said, hey, Gary, I want to see you in my office, the walk from your desk to the office is I did a podcast with a young lady. She was mentally, where's the box I'm going to grab to put all my stuff in because they're going to fire me right now and I want to make it as clean as possible, versus getting into the meeting saying, we love you and we want to promote you. So our mind, our amygdala goes negative fast. I got to give you feedback. We need to talk. That's the first thing. So you have to get comfortable with opening yourself up to that. When you open yourself up for it, then the person knows it's a safe place for them to go. It may not happen the first time or second time, but once that comfortable level is there, then they're free to walk into that space. And one of the techniques that I learned from Adam Grant when seeking feedback, and all too often, all of us that are good performers, hey, you're great, just keep doing what you're doing. The most useless piece of feedback I can ever imagine giving, because it's lazy on the other person. So what I try to say, be very specific on your feedback and say, hey, how was I in that presentation? Oh, you were great. You smashed it. On a scale of 1 to 10, how was I? Oh, you were a solid 8, if not a 9. Awesome. Thank you. What can I do to be a 10? Then it gets the other person thinking, because the other person, either they're lazy and they don't want to give you feedback, and they may not always be the case, or they just haven't thought about it or haven't given it any time and they just want to move on. So when you ask the question that way, it gives them the time to think and the time to be creative. And you may put them in an awkward spot, and that's okay. The other tool that you can use when getting feedback, a lot of times you're at a certain level. So, hey, I'm a consultant. I want to be a senior consultant. Hey, how am I doing on this as a consultant? Oh, you're great. You're top scale. What do I need to do at a senior level? Oh, okay. So if you want to be a senior level, you need to start working on this, this, and this. So thinking about the next level and creating a safe space for the other person to walk in and give you honest feedback, that's on you. And if you always want to hear the attaboy, attagirl, you're doing great, just keep it up, keep it up. But if you're really interested in improving your career, look for feedback and give the other person a safe space for them to open up to you. Now, on the flip side, giving feedback, it took me a long time to get comfortable with it. And the two things that I do is first thing I want to do is be very empathetic and get an understanding of, hey, is something going on? Your performance has dipped a little bit, and I need to understand that. So you get the information, you realize there's tough times at home or things that you didn't know. It's like, oh, hey, is there any way I can support you on this? Or what can we do? And we need to have an honest conversation because it's coming through in your work, and I want to figure out how to support you on that. Another circumstance I had was my direct report. I had to go get feedback. I talked to 7 people. I knew it wasn't going to be a positive meeting. And it was incumbent upon me to give the feedback because I'm a fiduciary of the company. In this case, it was KPMG. I thought it's my responsibility to give feedback that isn't positive to the person because A, they need to know it, and B, it's an obligation to the organization for me to come through with concrete points. So talked to several people. I got a very defensive individual. I provided examples. It was point after point. I showed support. How can we get you up to the next level? I'm here to support you. Well, 2 weeks later, he moved on. Mm-hmm. And I talked to people. I said, that was the best circumstance for that individual because this individual wasn't fitting in there into the organization, and it was very apparent. And had I not given direct, honest feedback that was, once I got my head around it, it was my obligation to deliver. I wouldn't say it was easy to deliver, but I needed to deliver it, and delivered it in, I thought, a nice, kind, open way. And the ending result was this individual moving on, and it was a great thing. And afterwards, there was some communication between us, and he was very appreciative of that. And it helped to seal that maybe that wasn't the best place for him. Mm-hmm. And that's the other point of it, is somebody may be on the wrong track and they're just lulling in it, and they need that encouragement or that honest upfront perspective and feedback so that they can have the ability to move on to something that they really do enjoy.
Right. Yeah. And I don't disagree. That's always tough feedback. And I think, but being honest, to your point, but having lots of empathy around it and compassion, it's still a human being. They still have bills to pay, families to support. But I always say, you know what? If they're not doing a good job, chances are they're not happy anyways. And sometimes they need a little bit of help in order to make that change. And they can end up better for it. I can't tell you how many times in my HR career we've unfortunately had to have those conversations. But you start to feel better when you hear back from individuals, like you speak about, because sometimes you hear the phenomenal job or whatever that they've received, and they're just so much happier, and they actually thank you for giving them that nudge, because it's never easy, right? It's And the more and more you stay in that disengaging job, or you get flustered and you get frustrated and you become more complacent, and you end up really not only not enjoying your work, but not enjoying who you are anymore, which is really tough to come back from sometimes. So I think feedback is great. And I think year-end performances are a great thing where the individual takes control, and usually don't see that, right? It's usually the leader just providing the feedback, but I love that the individual themselves taking that ownership and asking those questions, which is why feedback after everything you do is kind of important if it's your first go around, first training session or anything like that, right? Where you can receive feedback from individuals on how you did.
So 2 points. One, I wanted to tie back to what I said earlier on feedback. One was a very positive thing. Like, hey, Gary, you acclimate very quickly. So that's feedback in a very positive way. Then if you give feedback in an improvement way, it's the same thing. So feedback doesn't always have to be on the negative side. It can be on the positive side. And it's what it is, it's a recognition of what you're seeing. My boss saw me as acclimated, and they're like, oh, I must be good at acclimating. And then you take it on. And if I was doing a poor job at something, they'd say, hey, you need to get better at that. So it's all too often we go through our career and we think it's invisible to people how we're mailing it in, or how we're not doing a good job, or how we're not happy. And all you're doing when you're providing is to give visibility, like, hey, we see you, we see what's going on, we recognize. And the empathy part is, we see that you're struggling. Is there a way that we can help you? And maybe more often post-pandemic, people feel they go under the radar and nobody notices them.
Right.
But it's a good way to notice good and bad, giving feedback to somebody else.
Yeah, I love that. That's great, great advice. Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit about, you talk about being a fan of minimalizing. And it
Minimalism, I think.
thank you. I can't say it today. And it has a tie to your philosophy and approach to both your career and your personal life. Being today's Balanced Leader podcast, maybe you can share a little bit about that and how that has really made a positive impact in your world.
So minimalism, I mean, there's books on it and people are talking about it. And I try to keep things as simple as possible. I don't like drama. I don't like creating controversy.
Mhm.
And I've never been married and no kids. So you can imagine there's not a lot of drama going on other than self-inflicted by me and my personality getting in my own way and the several, voices I have in my head. But I'm trending towards minimalism. We don't need a lot of stuff. And the older we get, it gets into the, oh, when I buy this, I'm going to be happy. And if you think about, oh, when I get the new iPhone, I'm going to be so happy. And when we're younger, you're happy for a week and then you're not happy anymore.
Right.
And that gets to the point we raised earlier about enjoy the process and the journey, and not when. Don't postpone your happiness when you get something. And what I'm recognizing is I like to clean out the closet. I don't need much stuff. I don't need to have a lot of things around me. I don't need a new this or a new that. I go with what I have, and it just makes things a lot less complicated for me personally. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with acquiring things, and if you have a hobby and you love certain things and that gives you joy, hey, have at it. Get as many of them as you want. But what I'm recognizing, your mind remembers things and categorizes things. And as I've moved around the world so many times, you don't need much to go. And when I go on trips, I tend to just pack very lightly. I don't need much. You don't need all these clothes, and because you're going to buy stuff when you're over there. You grab stuff when you need it, and don't anticipate buying a hat or an umbrella going into a place when in reality you never even used it. Just when you're there, you get it when you need it, instead of anticipating a need for something and going to it. And career-wise, I just try to keep it as simple as I could, really, and not overburden. Just try to be basic in everything that I'm seeing and not overcomplicate things. And I think that's the foundation of where I see it is, don't overcomplicate things. Try to keep it as simple as you can.
I find that in a lot of presentations, and Todd, who we both know, and I had a conversation about it when you see certain presentations. So you've got two different presentations. They both basically give you the same information, And when we talk about being a minimalist, you've got maybe pictures on a slide that you can speak to versus the other one that's got 1,000 words per slide that basically you're just reading. And we've often talked about how it's more about the learning, the conversation, the asking of the questions to really help individuals as opposed to just the diatribe of information that I'm going to give to you now. And we talked a little bit about how, that almost seems to be a bit of a lost art at this point. And so it's something that I hope that leaders are starting to learn how to use what you need, but it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be exactly have all the details, all the examples. You can speak to those. And that is, definitely something I was talking to him about when we were talking about being a leader and what it looked like moving forward and how that, is a learned thing that over time you get better at. So,
One of the things I'm noticing is coaching is being taught to more leaders
mhm,
as a way for them to connect with their team and individuals, peers, and otherwise. To your point about a picture versus a lot of words, a good leader, I think, now has to have almost a little bit of a coaching persona to them to ask insightful questions, to get out of them what they're seeing. And them, I mean, I hate to say them, but to get out of your team or team members what they see and ask more questions about how they see their success or how they see themselves improving or where they see their career going. So I am finding that a lot more coaching is being taught inside of organizations to help them better connect with the people that are reporting up to them and the generations that have honestly a different potentially mindset than we've had
right.
and what makes them tick and not trying to have the answers for them, but really coming to them with really good, insightful questions that get more information out of the individual rather than telling them and giving them advice or mentoring, more putting on a coaching persona more so now than they used to.
I agree, especially when you think about the different generations. And I don't know, I say that because not every generation is set to a specific way of learning or desires of what they want. But I have seen a shift around that where people are looking when they're wanting to learn or train to be a better leader. You're right. It is more around the communication and how do I ask the right questions and sometimes even train because people train differently, right? We know that some people would love to sit and read a textbook. Some people would rather be hands on. We've always had that. And so, how do we shift leaders that have been around forever into teaching the new ways with the new technology and things? And that is something that I've always been proud of myself that I've kept on and up with the technology to be able to stay on top of what's going on so that you can speak the lingo as I'm sure you do, right? You want to stay current so that you can help those that are growing because as coaches, that's what we want to do is we want to help people wherever we can to become better leaders or individuals overall.
Well, and just to link back into leadership, and you're sensing, or I'm sensing, a good leader has to have a lot of different personas on why that person is talking to them. One of the things I'm working with my current clients on is as somebody's coming and talk to you, what are you looking for from me? Because they need to know how to listen and open this. Because if they're listening as a coach versus their boss versus a team member versus a mentor versus an advisor or consultant, there's different ways to listen. And I think it's as you move up into leadership, you have to understand how you're listening and what your role is in that conversation. People may want to talk to you and just vent
Mhm.
out. And if you know ahead of time, what are you looking for from me? Hey, Gary, I'm looking for a solution to this problem. Okay. Or I'm just looking to get this off my chest because it just came out of something and I'm so upset with it. I just need to talk through it with somebody. And if you start giving them advice on that, it clunks up the whole thing. And everybody's been there when you think you're there to provide advice and they don't want your advice and they just want you to listen. So as a good leader, I think it's very important to understand and set up meetings specifically for specific reasons. If it's an impromptu and an ad hoc, like, hey, do you have 10 minutes? I need to talk to you. Hey, what are you looking for from me in this conversation? Because it's ad hoc. But as a leader, you can set up just a coaching session with somebody and let them know this is a coaching session. I'm not here to provide you advice or mentoring. I want to put on my coaching persona, and that's this conversation. Another conversation was, hey, I'm your boss, I'm your career advisor, I'm your mentor. That's the purpose of this one. So you can start segmenting how you need to show up in certain meetings and who you need to be to that individual, because they may come to you in 5 different ways that you need to understand your role in that interaction at that time. One is ad hoc. What are you looking for from me? The second is, as you set things up specifically and you want to work on your coaching muscles, because your mentoring muscles, your advising muscles are pretty darn strong, but you need to learn how to be a better coach and just ask questions. You would set up a meeting specifically designed for structuring that conversation to keep it more like a coaching session instead of an advising session.
Right. Yeah, and I agree completely with that. And it expands from what I have talked to individuals about around, when you bring somebody new on board or you've got a new team all of a sudden, you can't treat everybody with same paintbrush, right? So it's having that initial conversation with each individual around, how do you want to get feedback? What do you need from me? How do you operate? Okay, now I'm going to tell you how I operate so that there's no surprises. I may be somebody who needs to know that you're on track with a project. Well, the other individual might think you're micromanaging them, right? So how do you have that upfront conversation, and that communication is so key. And I love that to add to it, just understanding individuals and what they're coming to you for. And had one of the best bosses, I think, where I could do that, right? He'd call and, how is it going today? Oh, blah, 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 blah. Do you want some solutions? No, I just want a bit. Okay, I feel better. Now I can go on. Right. So I love that advice. That's great advice for our leaders, because sometimes we're going through the days so quickly and checking the box, we forget that piece of it to be able to connect with people.
Quick example on that, because you mentioned learning about somebody, how they want to work, how they learn best. So the example that I have, I'm working at a location and I realize a great young man working for the team, but he's very gregarious and he's very proud of himself, and he's happy to say how good looking he is and how good of a job that he does, but in a nice way. And you just appreciate him, and he worked hard. And once I realized he was one of 12 children, I thought, maybe that's why his personality, that was his mechanism to stand out with one of 12. And he didn't go in a corner and read a book. His personality was more like that. So really, as a leader, the more you learn about somebody's background, spend 5 or 10 minutes learning, hey, where did you come from? What was your background as coaching? I do this all the time. If I get a brand new coachee, I'll say, just tell me about yourself. Oh, well, what do you want to know? Siblings, parents, makeup, tell me about your childhood. What was it like? I think as leaders, it opens up this space for you to understand that person and learn more about them. So you can say, that may be why they're like that. Or ask them, say, how is that in your childhood impacting you here? Because I'm noticing something here. Not that you have to get, and that could be very therapist-like, but it's not. It's just recognizing you're seeing something and trying to put 2 and 2 together, but it helps you as a leader to understand them better. Another quick story. I've got too many of them, but I interviewed Dave Brown, who was my boss at KPMG, on the podcast, my Wish I Knew podcast. And he's just talking to me about himself and how he was. And I thought, if I was working for Dave Brown, I would absolutely listen to that podcast, because he's telling you about him and his background and how he grew up, and he's digging ditches and how he went to college and he was almost going to get kicked out. You're like, who Dave Brown is. And if you're working for him, and he said he walks into a room and nobody knows he's there, but he's a big presence individual. But when he starts talking at a table, everybody stops to listen. And he has a presence with his words, not with his demeanor, although he's probably more of a presence than he leads on to believe. But I recognize in that podcast, boy, I learned so much about him. And I thought, boy, if I'm flipping that as a leader to really understand my team, connect, build trust, gain an understanding. Like, we spent 15 minutes just talking about, and it's 15 minutes with somebody. That's nothing. Just, hey, let me learn about you.
Yeah.
And I don't know that leaders understand that they have the ability to do that, because as a leader, I don't know that I would have done that. And from an HR, You might say, Gary, I don't know. You might want to stay away from that because we don't want to get down into those areas and, make somebody feel uncomfortable. And there's fine lines out there. But boy, if you get to know your team a little bit better, it just shows that you care about them, you trust. There's that saying, they don't care how much you know until they know that you care.
Right.
And that to me is just a major part of learning your team and being honest. And it may help you deliver feedback to that individual. It may help you like, you really stand out on this. It's like your background said you were good at this. It's like, I can totally see it. You were an athlete when you were younger, and now I'm seeing the same thing. So that feels like who you are. And I just wanted to highlight that for you. So it can only help you as a leader.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other piece too is knowing what's important for them, right? Why are you here? What is this job doing for you? Is this a career path? Is like, where's your passion lie? What's important to you? Are titles important to you? Is a paycheck important to you? Why are you here at work? I found when I was an HR business partner and I was traveling in the field, I found that was a pretty quick way to get to know somebody fast in their reason for being where they were today, what was important to them. And it helped me to connect with them and to understand their thought process a little bit, to be able to support them or to even recognize them in a way that is authentic to them and means something to them.
So have you ever dealt with a leader that said, I can't understand my team. I don't know what they're all about. Well, have you asked them? No, I haven't. Well, why don't you ask them what's important to them, where they want to go? I can't
Yeah.
figure that person out. All you have to do is ask.
Yeah. Because they're happy to tell you.
Pretty much. And it builds a
It's like you
connection
could
for you.
call me gopher as long as you give me the paycheck so I could travel, I'm happy. Right? That's all that matters. That's awesome. You also talk a little bit about people watching, and I always find people watching super intriguing. I love to do it at the malls. I'm not a big mall shopper. My dad and I used to sit on the benches while my mom was shopping, and I love to people watch. So that observation alone can really help contribute to understanding an individual. What would you say in the business aspect that is beneficial from a people watching perspective? I mean, obviously, we don't want to be stalking people, but what have you noticed? And I love the example that you gave of the guy with the 12 siblings or 11 siblings, but there's probably some quick takeaways when you walk in and you see somebody when you're people watching that you can pick up on as a leader really quickly.
One thing about the people watching and then relating it to business, people watching gives me energy. And I view how I get into a situation, what happens to me. And everybody should be reflecting on what's happening inside of them. And
Mhm.
I notice when I watch other people, it gives me energy. I love it. I don't like participating in that with people. If I'm at a certain place, I don't want to be a player in it. I just want to stay on the sidelines and watch everybody else interact and how they interact. In a business context, when you're in meetings, observe other people and how they're reacting. And psychological safety, I know, is a big talking point these days with companies. And if you're a leader sitting in a room and you're seeing somebody not talking or recognizing they're a very quiet person, it's could be an opportunity for you to create space for that individual to say, Susan, I haven't heard you say anything. Is there anything you want to contribute to the conversation, or really like to hear get your voice in the room? Opening up space for someone else. The other thing I've noticed is in business, when somebody stops talking, somebody immediately starts talking. And you may recognize somebody's talking very quickly. And the power of observation, how their body language is, what they're saying. They may be talking quickly because they feel as soon as they stop talking, somebody else is going to cut in.
Mm.
And I mentored a young lady who would always speak very quickly. And she would screw up when she was speaking. According to her, she'd screw up. And I said, why are you speaking so quickly? She said, well, as soon as I stop talking, somebody jumps in. I said, what are ways for you to create space for you where you can slow down and let everybody know that you're not done? And we talked through, various techniques for doing that. But if you as a leader are reading the room, recognizing when people, aren't doing a great job of listening or they're distracted, you may, I have clients. I had a client today. They're looking and typing somewhere else. I said, hey, Jimmy, are you responding to something or are you taking a note? Because I'm noticing you're not paying attention. Oh no, I'm taking notes. Like, okay, I observed you weren't looking. So the power of observation is massive. I think James Clear will say we get like 11 billion stimuli and 10 million of them are through watching, right?
Crazy.
So our eyes are our way to understand things. So the more in tune you are with the power of observation, the more you're able to catch a feeling in a meeting or pull somebody out of a meeting afterwards and say, hey, I noticed you were very distracted in that meeting. Is that something we should talk about? And this is the immediate feedback that we want to provide to people, because people think that they're not seen. So it does two things. It tells them, I see you and I want to understand what's going on empathetically. Hey, what's going on? I noticed you were a bit distracted, which is really rare for you. Yeah, we just had something at home, and there's something. It's like, oh, well, thanks for telling me. Is there anything that we can do? Or, yeah, I don't know. I felt I was pretty on it. It's like, well, you weren't, and you need to start paying attention. And that empathy will help nurture, probably not the right word, your direction with that person. And that's why I like observing so much. It gives me energy. I love watching other people, and I don't necessarily need to be a player in it. But when you are a leader in a room, in a meeting, and you notice something, it's incumbent upon you. One point, I think I'd earlier mentioned I had 2 points. The second point that I failed to mention at the time was performance reviews. You said they're half yearly and yearly. If you're isolating your time just to that point, you get inundated with stuff. And it's not the fault of anybody other than the system, in that everybody's coming to you for feedback on their mentee or somebody that they're reviewing. So if you put that into your cadence on a monthly basis, if you really care about your career and want to do well, put that into your cadence on a monthly basis to always get feedback. So at 6 months, you've already gotten 5 months worth of feedback. And the 6 month is just another, and let them focus on somebody else. But as a leader, you can start working that into your cadence on the people that you're looking at to give them monthly feedback. So then it's not a big deal at 6 months. It's like, yeah, okay, yeah, this is we're improving from month 2 to now. It's been working.
I love that. I love that. And I used to keep a file folder for each person that reported into me. And whenever, to your point, whenever I got that, it was either a quick note or the summary of the feedback form or whatever that I would throw in there. And it just, you're right. It made it so much easier that when you pull it open, come time when you had to write it, you had a lot of that feedback already. And it was a conversation you already had with that individual, because you're not waiting 6 months to provide them that feedback. So, but you also can use it as a measuring point, right? Okay, so 5 months ago, you had an opportunity to work on this. And I've really noticed over that 5 months, wow, have you ever really worked hard on that? Because I can see a noticeable difference, and it's great. So let's just continue that momentum. So phenomenal. Yeah. I'm going to ask you the last question, Gary, that I ask all my guests. What is the biggest thing that you've learned throughout your journey that you can share with our listeners? So just the golden nugget. It could be a valuable lesson, a transformative experience, or even a book that's made a profound impact on your professional growth.
Asking more questions. I
Okay.
love questions. Ask questions for clarity. They're not confrontational, but the more you ask questions, the more clear you both will be about what you're looking for. The second thing is, you mentioned it in your question, but just enjoy the journey. Don't postpone your happiness until something happens. Because in management consulting, everybody thinks the next level up is easier. And once I become this level, it'll be easier. It's never easier. It's just different. So point there is just enjoy the journey and pause more often where you're at. Just celebrate yourself, celebrate where you're at, and enjoy that. And the questions are for clarity. Questions aren't confrontational. The minute I made partner, people think that you always have to have all the answers. I feel as executives, leaders, you have to have the best questions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I would sit with leadership, because all too often they soak the energy out of the room because they feel compelled to have all the answers for everything, when in reality, you're further away from the detail and you're higher up in the strategy. So your questions will help form where you need to go next, because you're not in the detail anymore. And you constantly have to reconfigure what your role is in the organization and how you show up. But the more I learn about coaching, the more I study questions, the power of questions, what do you need from me in a conversation? How can I support you in your career? Asking great questions, thinking in questions. I try to think now in questions. Even it infiltrates my whole life. If I'm in disagreement with somebody about something, instead of stating my point of view, I'll just ask a question now and let them back up what they said. And it's a very nuanced thing just in daily life. But too often we go back, they have a perspective on it. We have a different, so we're each trying to fight for our own perspective instead of saying, what drew you to that conclusion? What's your level of thinking there? Why do you think that? What's the alternative to that, do you think? And let the question do the heavy lifting. It's just the best thing ever. It's like a superpower. I'm telling you, if you can learn how to ask good questions, change your life.
We're going to have a sidebar. I love that. Thank you, Gary. So I want to thank you so much for being a guest on our show. We'll have to have you back another time so I can ask you the rest of my questions.
Thanks for having me.
I've got lots of questions.
There you go. I love it.
As we conclude today's episode, I want to remind you all that Gary has 2 podcasts that he runs himself. One called Wish I Knew, where he captures individual career journeys. And the other one's called Coffee House Coaching, which I've listened to a lot, bringing you enlightening discussions with executive coaches. So be sure to explore those podcasts for even more valuable insights and stories. And remember, listeners, your career is a marathon, not a sprint. Everything you learn and experience becomes a valuable part of your journey, molding your emotional intelligence and resilience, which in turn transforms you into a more adaptable and empathetic professional. The key lies in prioritizing self-awareness and truly understanding yourself. Thank you again for joining us, Gary.
Thank you very much for your time, and I'll come back anytime you need me. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. That's all for this episode of Today's Balanced Leader. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion on wellness and leadership, and that you took away some valuable insights and strategies to help you become a better leader in your own life. Please leave a rating and review. I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss the next one, as we continue our exploration of what it means to live life as today's leader. In the meantime, take care of yourself and remember that true leadership starts with taking care of your own well-being. 1 deep breath in and 1 deep breath out. Keep striving for excellence and inspiring others to do the same. And finally, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time on Today's Balanced Leader.